Before you imagine swinging doors and nightly chaos, picture something quieter instead. A single line in a town ledger, ink pressed carefully into paper by someone responsible for making the numbers work. Rent paid, barrels delivered, wages settled. It doesn't look like legend, it looks like routine. And that's exactly where the real story begins. Because the distance between what we expect the Old West to be and what it actually was is wider than most people realize. I'm standing on a main street that could belong to almost any Western town if you roll the calendar back far enough. The ground is packed hard. The wind carries dust. The buildings look temporary, as if they were raised quickly and dared the weather to challenge them. Popular imagination tells us the saloon was the source of every problem, a place where trouble walked in nightly and left only after a dramatic confrontation. That version is loud, simple, and easy to remember. But when you follow what was actually left behind, newspaper ads, business ledgers, city rules, private letters, a different picture emerges. Historians who study these records describe saloons not as non-stop disorder, but as working parts of frontier life. Imperfect, noisy, sometimes tense, yet essential to keeping a town moving. So let's slow down and ask a question the myths usually skip. What did a real saloon actually do for a frontier town? And why did people keep opening them? The answer is practical, not romantic. A saloon wasn't just scenery, it was a solution. Life on the frontier was exhausting and often lonely. People needed light after dark, warmth in winter, conversation after silence, and a place where information traveled faster than mail. In saloons, workers learned who was hiring, what supplies cost, which shipment had arrived, which election mattered, and who owed whom. Paydays were marked there. Long days were shaken off there. And in towns with few buildings and fewer institutions, saloons were often open when almost nothing else was. The word saloon itself hides a lot of variety. Legends freeze it into one image, but the West changed fast, and saloons changed with it. In early mining camps, a saloon might be nothing more than a tent with a plank counter and a few crates for seats. Later, as towns settled and railroads connected regions, saloons became solid storefronts on busy streets, competing with brighter lamps, better music, and more comfortable rooms. The name stayed the same, but the reality underneath it didn't. To understand the truth, you have to follow that evolution, not cling to a single snapshot. Here's where the story gets more complicated and more interesting. Saloons didn't just serve towns, they helped shape them. In some communities, a saloon owner was a respected business person. In others, a controversial figure. Bartenders weren't only pouring drinks, they were hosts, mediators, and sometimes enforcers of order. Some saloons were rough, others aimed for respectability. Some catered to specific groups, others welcomed anyone with a coin. Town councils didn't regulate saloons because they were fictional stages for endless brawls, but because they were common, influential, and woven into daily life. So when you hear the word saloon, hold two images at once. One is the myth, the exaggerated picture repeated so often it feels like memory. The other is the paper trail, receipts, advertisements, rules, and records that tell a quieter but richer story. A saloon was a place where a fragile town practiced becoming a real one, where strangers became regulars, rumors turned into information, money circulated, and social lines were drawn and redrawn. If that sounds less glamorous than the legend, stay with me. The truth isn't smaller, it's larger. It's about how people built social life in places that barely existed yet, and how one ordinary doorway, swinging open and shut, grew into a symbol far bigger than the room behind it. Picture a camp that was never meant to last. Just a handful of wagons pulled close, tools half buried in dirt, smoke curling up from a small fire. And then, almost as an afterthought, 4 wooden posts hammered into the ground to mark out a square. Someone stretches a rough tarp across the top to keep off the wind and the worst of the weather. That's it. No polished bar. No proud front sign. No swinging doors made for show. In the earliest years of westward expansion, this could be a saloon. If you wandered up to it at the end of a long day, you might not even be sure you'd arrived. There may not be a proper doorway, because there may not be proper walls. In one place, it's a tent thrown up fast and tied down hard. In another, it's a shaky lean-to. 3 sides that don't quite meet. Rafters braced against a post, and a slanted roof like a shed. The goal isn't style. The goal is simple. Shelter, light, and somewhere you can stand for an hour without feeling exposed. Inside, the center of the space usually belongs to a single wood-burning stove. Not for cooking, just for heat, because frontier nights could turn cold without warning. Around it are rough tables, or sometimes nothing more than boards laid across a stump. The floor is trampled grass or packed dirt. The air smells like smoke, sweat, wet wool, and boots that never fully dry. It isn't built for comfort. It's built because people need somewhere to go. And the people inside aren't always the dramatic cast the movies like to show. In the early days, you'd mostly find working men trying to rest, trade news, and feel less alone. Miners with dirt under their nails, laborers who hauled freight and supplies, ranch hands passing through with a message or a deal to make, travelers who just want to hear another human voice after days of trail silence. Sometimes soldiers stationed far from home. Many are young, far from family, living in a world where the future feels uncertain and the day-to-day feels brutally repetitive. In that kind of life, even a rough room starts to matter. The person pouring drinks might not even call themselves a bartender yet. It could be the owner. It could be whoever is trusted to pour and collect payment. The bar might be a plain plank counter, or even a serving cart pushed into place when the crowd shows up. And what's being offered isn't elegant. Supply lines are unreliable in a camp that might vanish within a year, so the liquor is often homemade, strong, and inconsistent. The names can be colorful, but the truth is plain. It's alcohol made from whatever people can get. The quality is uneven, and it's usually served at room temperature. Cold drinks aren't part of this moment in history. Without modern refrigeration, there's no reason to expect anything chilled, and most people don't. Still, the drink isn't the main point. The pause is. You step in. You nod to the faces you recognize. You feel out the room the way people do when they've learned to read safety and tension quickly. In many camps, there's a quiet sense of cooperation because everyone depends on everyone else. A newcomer gets asked where they came from and what they've heard. Someone mentions a job opening. Someone else complains a supply wagon arrived late. There's talk of a claim that looks promising, a price that just jumped, a trail that washed out, another one that's safer for wagons. Ranchers talk business. Travelers gather warnings and directions. It's small talk, but it's also useful talk. And that's the key to understanding these early saloons. They aren't entertainment venues the way we imagine later. They're support systems. They grow out of the same rough need as the camp itself. When people are spread thin across harsh land, when days are heavy and lonely, a shared room, even a crude one, becomes important. It turns into a kind of center, not because it's glamorous, but because it's available. In the beginning, the saloon isn't a symbol. It's a shelter with a stove, a counter, and a handful of people trying to make frontier life feel, if only for an hour, more livable. A train whistle slices through the morning air, and the whole town seems to answer it. Hammers start ringing. Wagons creak into motion. Voices rise. When the railroad reaches a frontier town, it doesn't just deliver people and freight. It delivers a new kind of time. Schedules, predictable shipments, news from far away that arrives on a set day instead of whenever the trail allows. And with that shift, the old drinking tent, the temporary lean-to that could vanish overnight, starts to fade out of the picture. I watch a main street form almost like a time-lapse. Canvas and rough boards give way to framed walls. False front buildings rise in a neat line like a promise. General store, office, hotel, livery, and almost always, at least one saloon. In the early camps, a drinking spot could move with the wind. In a railroad town, owners build to stay. They choose a corner, file paperwork, pay rent or buy a lot, paint their name across the front. The word saloon stays the same, but the meaning changes. Now it's a permanent business, one with competition, reputation, and regulars. And these towns often grow faster than their public services can keep up. A courthouse might still be months away. A real town hall might not exist yet. But people still need an indoor place to gather, somewhere to settle questions, hold meetings, exchange information, and make decisions. That's where the saloon steps into roles the myths rarely mention. In many places, it becomes the most reliable public room in town. There's light, there are chairs, there's warmth in winter, and there's an owner with every reason to keep the doors open. Old photographs and local histories describe notices tacked to saloon walls, job offers, missing livestock, shipments arriving, rooms for rent, announcements for socials and dances. A man looking for work doesn't walk into an employment office, because there may not be one. He walks into the busiest place in town and checks what's pinned up. A rancher looking for buyers doesn't wait for a formal market to appear. He talks to people with cash and connections, and those people are often already gathered where business is being discussed. In a growing town, a saloon can act like a bulletin board, a handshake desk, and a waiting room all at once. Some even host meetings that matter. Community groups meet there because it's practical. Visiting speakers rent the room because it's available. Political conversations happen because the crowd is already there, and because the building can actually hold them. In certain towns, debates and elections were held in or near saloons, simply because there weren't many other large indoor spaces yet. The saloon becomes part of the town's basic structure, not because it's noble, but because it's there when people need it. Halfway through this shift, what catches me off guard isn't the noise of a boomtown. It's a single line in a record, plain, almost casual. A business owner mentions paying for an extra stove and benches because people needed a place to sit during a bitter stretch of cold. That sentence lands like a quiet reminder. These places weren't built only for profit. They were also built because a town without shared space is just strangers living close together. And once you become the town's shared space, you face a choice that shows up again and again in the West. Do you run your business like a closed circle for your best customers? Or do you open the door wide, knowing a wide open door brings both opportunity and responsibility? I can almost see the owner weighing it in real time. A bigger room costs money. More light means more fuel. Letting meetings happen steals hours from paying customers. But turning people away costs something too. Reputation, trust, the feeling that this town takes care of its own. In many places, a saloon owner becomes a local figure not just because of what he sells, but because of how he manages that balance. As the town grows, saloons multiply. One isn't enough for a street packed with new arrivals every week. Different places begin to serve different crowds. Some aim for quieter rooms and cleaner floors to attract travelers with money. Others stay rough and simple, focused on workers and locals. Some attach themselves to hotels. Some offer a back room where business can be discussed away from noise and eyes. And in a few towns, a saloon might even offer a bed for the night. Not as luxury, but as a practical solution when lodging can't keep up. By the time train schedules feel normal, the saloon has moved from the edge of the settlement into the center of town life. It's no longer just a pause at the end of the day. It's where work is found, deals are made, notices are posted, meetings are held, and where a brand new community slowly decides what kind of place it wants to become. The first thing I notice is the sound under my boots. Not packed dirt this time, but floorboards, real boards, that creak in a steady rhythm as people move from the door to the bar and back again. The room is brighter than those early camp tents, and it feels designed. Lamps sit where they're needed. The counter is built to last. Behind it, bottles and glassware line the shelves like inventory, not decoration. This is the mature saloon, the kind that appears once a town stops improvising and starts settling in, when regular deliveries and returning customers make a real business possible. From where I stand, I can see how the space guides behavior. The bar is still the heart of the room, but it isn't the only point of gravity. Tables are placed so groups can gather without choking the walkway. A stove or heater sits where it can warm the most bodies. In some places, there's a mirror behind the counter that makes the room feel larger and lets the person running the bar keep an eye on what's happening without turning his head. Nothing here is accidental. A saloon owner who wants to stay open learns quickly. A crowded room needs structure, and the bartender isn't just pouring drinks. He's reading faces, listening for rising voices before they become a problem, keeping track of credit, tabs, and who is already past their limit, deciding who gets served, who gets cut off, and who needs to be guided toward the door before trouble has a chance to grow. In a busy town, that job takes skill, patience, a steady sense of where the line is. He's also a local guide, whether he wants to be or not. New arrivals step in with questions. Regulars bring news. Travelers want directions, prices, names, warnings. The bartender becomes part host, part manager, part peacekeeper, because the success of the place depends on people feeling like they can come back tomorrow. Even the drinks tell you the West is changing. In the earliest camps, the choices were limited and the quality could be rough. Here, supply lines are stronger. Breweries take hold in some regions. Bottles arrive more regularly now that shipping is less of a gamble. Beer is easier to find. Packaged spirits are more common. Mixed drinks exist, but plenty of customers still keep it simple. The bigger point is that the saloon no longer feels improvised. It feels connected to a larger system of trade, delivery, and routine. And then there's the pull of entertainment. A saloon isn't always quiet, and it isn't always centered on the bar. Music becomes a draw. Maybe one musician in the corner, maybe a small group hired for the night. In some towns, performers move through on a circuit, following crowds the way the railroad follows profit. People come for sound, laughter, and a break from repetition. Even when the music is simple, it changes everything. It turns a drink into an occasion. Games do the same. Cards are common, and some saloons set aside space for organized play. Faro shows up again and again in old accounts, becoming one of the signature games tied to the era. For many customers, it isn't just about winning. It's about watching, reacting, arguing, laughing, feeling the room tighten when the card turns. The saloon sells that feeling as much as it sells anything in a bottle. But this room also brings the serious parts of town life into public view. Deals happen here because the right people are often in the same place at the same time. A rancher meets a buyer. A freight worker hears about his next job. A newcomer learns quickly who is trusted and who should be avoided. And at the same time, the saloon exposes a town's tension. Status matters. Reputation matters. Clothes, accent, connections. Those details can decide how you're treated before you even open your mouth. In some places, there are clear boundaries around who is welcome, who gets served, and who is made to feel unsafe. Segregation and other forms of exclusion shape where people can sit, which rooms they can use, and whether they're allowed to belong at all. The saloon reflects a town's unfair rules just as clearly as it reflects its energy. By the end of the night, the picture is sharper than the legend ever gives you. This isn't only a place for noise. It's a workplace, a meeting ground, and a social stage with rules, most of them enforced quietly, most of the time. The bartender keeps the current moving. The room pulls people together. And in the small decisions, Who gets served? Who gets space? Who gets turned away? You can watch a growing town decide what kind of community it wants to be. By the time a frontier town can afford a brick schoolhouse and a proper courthouse, you can usually feel the mood shifting. The street that once cheered every new storefront starts asking harder questions. What kind of place are we becoming? What do we want our children to grow up around? What should be normal here? That's when the saloon stops being just a business and starts becoming a symbol. In editorials and sermons, in town meetings and private conversations, the argument expands beyond drinks and music. It becomes a debate about public order, family life, wages, and reputation, about whether a town can call itself settled, while one of its busiest doors still leads into a room built around liquor. And I can almost hear how those conversations sounded. One voice insists the saloon pulls people off track, drains paychecks, fuels fights, and leaves families carrying the cost. Another voice fires back that the saloon is where workers find jobs, travelers get news, and small businesses stay alive. Both sides point to real things. Records from many Western towns show that officials and community leaders didn't treat saloons like imaginary stages from dime novels. They treated them like powerful social spaces that shaped behavior, simply because so many people passed through their doors. As towns grew, reform groups grew with them. Many were led by people who sincerely believed communities needed stricter standards and fewer daily temptations. Temperance organizations became especially influential, pushing for limits on sales and operating hours, higher fees, and stronger rules overall. They didn't always agree on methods, but their goal was clear: reduce the saloon's grip on public life. Saloon owners and their supporters pushed back. Some argued for personal responsibility. A town doesn't fix itself by banning a bottle. Others warned that shutting down saloons wouldn't end drinking. It would just move it into alleys, back rooms, and private homes, out of view, out of regulation, out of any community control. And this is where the story stops being simple nostalgia and becomes a real civic struggle. It isn't just good people versus bad people. It isn't only about what's in a glass. It's about who gets to set the rules for everyone. Licensing, taxes, Sunday closures, curfews, local ordinances. Every vote is a direction chosen, and those choices could split neighbors who otherwise shared the same hardships. A rancher and a preacher might agree about roads and schools and still clash over saloons. A shop owner might rely on saloon traffic while worrying about what happens when workers spend their wages before they make it home. The debates weren't always polite. They weren't always fair. But they were real. And they mattered because the saloon mattered. In many places, pressure eventually turned into crackdowns. Town councils raised licensing fees. Counties tightened enforcement. States passed stronger laws. Some saloons tried to adapt by presenting themselves as respectable, adding food, hosting music, leaning into social clubs. Others closed, either because the rules grew too costly or because the town's mood changed. And as national politics and broader movements gained momentum, local arguments gained new weight. Over time, the saloon era, as a normal, everyday feature of American town life, began to fade. But here's the twist. The saloon didn't disappear from American memory. It transformed. As the frontier period ended and entertainment media expanded, the saloon became a ready-made stage. One room where you could place a hero, a rival, a tune, a challenge, and a dramatic moment, all in a single frame. That version was easier to film, easier to repeat, and easier to understand than the complicated reality of a business that also functioned as a job board, a meeting hall, and sometimes the only warm public room in town. When you step back, what's striking isn't that the myth exists. It's why it's stuck. The saloon was one of the few places where frontier life connected in public. News, work, money, entertainment, politics, and identity crossed paths there. That made it powerful, and anything powerful becomes contested. Reformers saw it as an obstacle to a safer, steadier community. Supporters saw it as a practical center in a hard world. Both sides were reacting to the same truth. The saloon mattered. As I leave that street behind, I keep thinking about how history survives, not as a perfect record, but as a tug-of-war between what happened and what people choose to remember. If this surprised you, hold on to that feeling. It means you're starting to see past the easy version and into the real one. And if you want more true stories that separate legend from life, stories about how Americans built towns, rules, and culture from the ground up, stay with me. Share this with someone who loves history and come back for the next chapter.